Hello, this is Dr. Mewborn, and this is History of the Baptists. Today we're looking at Lesson 30, and we're talking about Baptists in the North. Now, what this pertains to, or what we're dealing with in this lesson today, is the split that took place between the North and the South. And we've talked about this in the past, that split was ultimately the result of the South wanting to allow missionaries and pastors to be slaveholders. And so there became a huge schism in all of this, and it caused a lot of problems. And so the South broke off from the North and created their own convention, per se. And so how did we get to that? Well, events leading to the sectional division, 1830 to 1833, pressure from Baptists to be anti-slavery. In 1834, Triennial Convention responds to this and responds in such a way of saying we're trying to be neutral. But then in 1835, anti-slavery Baptists respond. And then in 1840, formation of American Baptist anti-slavery conventions takes place in New York with their process, or their thought process of we're pulling away from all of these and we're going to do our own society because y'all are going the wrong direction. And we talked about that with the Triennial Conventions, really just trying to be neutral, and we saw a picture of that on the right, but it became a big deal. But what happens in 1845, the South actually splits off from the North, and they become their own, what we call today the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, when we talk about the Southern Baptist Convention, there are three main reasons for the split from the Home Mission Society, also Triennial Convention, and we're talking about the disagreements on methods of organization, problems in home mission work, and then, of course, the slavery controversy. Slavery became the final and most deciding factor for the schism, and so this was the big thing. But when we start to see the split take place, and when we see the North becoming more focused, of course, on what they're doing, and the southern states, or the South, becoming more focused on what they're doing, there were some changes that took place there. And to get to that, what was going on, the perspectives? Well, many Baptists believed that the split was a positive thing for Baptists. Now, how could this be positive? And so Adoniram Judson congratulated the Southern Baptists for launching their own convention. The reason he was congratulating them is because he saw this as being a move in the right direction to extend or multiply the work of mission boards and the work of or mission work in general. And so he saw this as being a good thing. It wasn't looking at it from what are we doing wrong or truly what's causing the split, but even though there was a split, we're going to get more people ministered to, and that was kind of the focus on that during this time, which was interesting for some folks, but that's what they were saying. Other Baptists believed that the split to be a heretical move on the part of Southern Baptists. Moreover, they believed that God would soon discipline their ungodly actions, and so they believed this. They believed that God was going to come against them, and many Northerners thought that God's going to come against them. It's going to be a rough time. And I thought of this where Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. At this, he turned around and said, looking at his disciples, rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." Kind of a paraphrase there, but what this is giving us is this moment when Jesus rebukes Peter and says, "Peter, get behind me, Satan." He's calling him out because what he is doing, he doesn't have the mind of Christ, and that's causing a lot of problems there. And so that's one of the thoughts of what many Baptists thought was going to happen. God would rebuke him. But during the schism, Baptists in the North took the opportunity to change their name and constitution. The new name became the American Baptist Missionary Union, ABMU. It was devoted exclusively to foreign missions. You could become life members, but you were responsible to pay $100 for the dues there. And then one of the people that became president of this was George Briggs, 1796 to 1861, that he lived, was the 19th governor of Massachusetts. Serving 7 successive terms from 1844 to 1851, he eventually became the president of the ABMU. Here's a picture of him here. And I wanted to show you this because there were some very high-powered, strong people that became presidents of these mission societies because they loved the Lord. These people were Christians. This man had been converted, was a child of God, and he was living that out in government and as a governor. But then he said, he felt a calling to be president of the ABMU, and so he went down that direction. And so there's a lot of incredible things that are happening in the North after the split actually took place. Now, for the ABMU, this seemed to be a great ministry for missions until it seemingly removed missions from the local church. What's taking place here is that as the focus of these unions or these conventions or societies were more for missions, they kind of had the market on that. It sounds a little odd to say that, but they felt that their responsibility solely was to just do mission work, and they would take over the mission work of many of the churches. Instead of the churches doing it, it was just conventions and things like that. Missions became more of a parachurch ministry than that of the church, and that's what they were doing. As mission work moved to the ABMU, the gospel outreach went worldwide. Burma, India, and the Congo were greatly impacted by mission work. What was happening during this time was revival around the world. In many places, not around the world, but in many places around the world. And what we saw was God mightily using the funds that were coming in, the prayers that were going out, and people's lives were being changed and being saved, and people wrote about this. This is one of those actually papers, or many of these papers, that's talking about a conference that took place and revival that was taking place called the Assam Mission of the American Baptist Missionary Union. There was a lot of this going on, and people were writing about it because God was truly working. So there was many great things that came out of the ABMU during this time. Major trends of the Northern Baptists at this time: home office versus field direction. Here are some of the trends. Here's some of the things that were happening that took place. Now, what is this referring to? Missionaries were often supported financially, but they received little direction. Eventually, missionaries made decisions without consulting the society. So some of the trends that were taking place with Northern Baptists, and there's 4 of these that I'm going to mention, but number 1 was the home office versus the field direction. The issue is that prayers were going out, finances were going out, but there was little direction for the people. So what people were doing is making decisions on the field to possibly go their own way. And this might sound a little unusual, but some people became rogue missionaries. They took the money, they took some of the things that they had learned along the way, and then they just, without consulting the convention or the society, they just left and went and did mission that they wanted to do. And so instead of being truly assigned to an area and staying in that area and following the direction of the union, they were going off and doing their own thing. And that became quite an issue. Another thing was education versus evangelism was going on during this time. Some missionaries believed that the spread of the gospel occurred through trained indigenous groups, not American missionaries. Others focused more on evangelistic outreach instead of education. And so this became a very big struggle also for the ABMU, because they were trying to figure out what is the best system. Is it training the indigenous people, and then they take the gospel forth and lead other people to Christ and create types of schools and churches and things like that? Or should we just focus on letting the missionaries go forth, do the work of the evangelist, and then continue on ministering, discipleship, and leading in that way? And so this was a very unique struggle that they were having at this time. I wanted to show you, this is a group of indigenous folks here from Maasai tribe of Kenya. And I was actually looking at a couple of websites, and they were saying this is one of 6 groups that are endangered indigenous people groups that truly have been there for so long, holding on to their rituals and their culture and all those types of things. But what they need, what they were struggling with is during the ABMU, they were wondering, should we just go and evangelize these people as the American missionaries going to evangelize, or should we work to train others there that are part of the indigenous group, and they become ministers and pastors and things like that. So there's different kinds of models, philosophies for mission work, but this is some of the stuff that the ABMU were dealing with at the time. Other things, development of indigenous churches. Northern Baptists encourage indigenous churches to become self-supporting and self-directing as soon as possible. And so as there was a move toward more indigenous churches developing, they wanted them to become self-supporting and self-directing as soon as possible. And then one of the topics that they talked about a lot was the role of women missionaries. After much debate, in 1867, a survey, an 1867 survey showed that qualified women missionaries were welcome on the field. Now, before this, there were definitely women missionaries on the field. That was not even a question. But a lot of times they're not recognized because they saw it as a pastoral position. It was a role of a man that was to do it. And so many of the women are not recognized, and we don't see that until later on. In like mid 1800s or something like that. But by 1900, the women's societies had appointed 113 women missionaries, and they were putting them on the field and helping them to be ready for all of that. I love this cover, Pioneers. Well, this is Christian History Biography, Christian History Magazine, but Pioneers of the American Missionary Movement. Adoniram and Ann Judson. Doing incredible work for the gospel of Jesus Christ in Burma. And so you see that happening. Anne was just as much of a missionary as Adoniram, and so we kind of see a good cover there. All right, Baptists in the North, what they face? European immigration during this time, organized labor during this time, development of an industrial economy, and as a result, evangelistic and theological differences emerged. The social gospel was among the new doctrines in Baptist beliefs. So what we're seeing here is that with all the mission work that's happening, with all of that that's taking place, and missionaries are going to different parts of the world, there was just a huge influx of immigrants coming to America at this time. So not only were missionaries going out of the country of America, but what was happening is immigrants, people from around the world, were coming to America. And during this time, of course, what you call the another form of the Industrial Revolution in America, this was this change, this excitement, this growth that was unprecedented in America. They hadn't seen it like this, and people were coming in by the boatloads. Truly. And so they often came to this place. This is Ellis Island, the Great Hall in Ellis Island, New York City. Approximately 12 million immigrants had come through this place, and they were coming through with all their cultures intact. They were just coming to this country that they found out was free, and they could get here. That there was freedom is what I mean. They could come and they could worship and they could live how they wanted to live, and people were coming in, but it wasn't all a perfect scene in New York, because even though there was so many new people coming in, a lot of times people didn't know what to do once they got here, and they ended up living in these major cities, and they became cities that were just trash heaps. One place called Hell's Kitchen was just a horrible, dangerous place to live during this time, and nobody wanted to live there. It was the slums, but they were living there because they had nowhere else to go, and they had no money, and they couldn't do anything. And so there was all kinds of theft going on. There was all types of immorality, all forms of prostitution. All that was happening in the late 1800s, as truly America's growing, but New York was growing, but also struggling in some ways too. But many people came through Ellis Island during this time. In the middle of all of that was a guy named Walter Rauschenbusch, 1861 to 1918. This guy was a pastor and theologian in New York. He was actually in Hell's Kitchen, became a professor at Rochester Theological Seminary, and what he's so well known for is the social gospel. Rauschenbusch linked Christianity to emerging theories of democratic socialism, which he believed would lead to equality and a just society. The kingdom of God, he said, is not a matter of getting individuals to heaven, but of transforming the life on earth into the harmony of heaven. His whole point is we need to see heaven on earth. That was his whole point. And for many, many, many years, his desire was to usher in the kingdom of God, that he was going to usher it in by making everything better and better and better, that Jesus will just come to America, and life will be perfect. Many Puritans believe that. Also, Walter Rauschenbusch believed that. The thing that changed that for him was, of course, when World War I breaks out, there's a change in mindset, because now we're seeing the whole world's at war, or the whole idea of the world's at war. And so that kind of killed a lot of what the thought process of the social gospel was. But Walter Rauschenbusch, along with many others, believed more like this. They believe that I'm a Christian, or no, I do good, therefore I'm a Christian. Now, truly in Baptist theology, doctrine, Baptist faith and message, that would be the wrong way of putting it. You wouldn't say, I do good, therefore I'm a Christian. You would say, I'm a Christian, therefore I do good. The Christianity is what matters in order for us to be able to do what is right and what is good. And so there was kind of a flip-flop on this idea of what the social gospel was actually teaching, and it was heretical gospel. Charles Sheldon pushed this in many ways. We know so much about this book in his steps, also has a tagline, "What would Jesus do?" and WWJD. Well, that comes from a long time ago. That started a long time ago. Charles Sheldon, from 1857 to 1946, a minister in the city of Topeka, Kansas. 1897, he wrote this novel in his steps. And it's the idea of saying, what does it look like to walk in the steps of Christ? To be a Christian, he argued, one needed to walk in Jesus' footsteps. What would Jesus do? Became a central theme of the social gospel movement. And Ohio minister Washington Gladden called the movement social salvation. This concept emphasized that religion's fundamental purpose was to create systemic changes in American political structures. And so they were trying to break against some of the things that they saw, like capitalism or things like that they felt were wrong, and people were oppressing other people to just become more and more rich. And they were saying, this isn't right. What we need to do is act more like Jesus. And when we act more like Jesus, we become more Christian, or we become Christian. And that's what it takes. And so therein lies the question, were these people truly teaching and preaching a true biblical salvation? And we would say no, if taking it a certain way. And so you have to be very careful when you look at these topics. Can there be some good things we glean from it? Of course. Are there some great things we can glean from In His Steps? Definitely. But I think we need to be very careful when we start saying, what would Jesus do? Creating a scenario that Jesus isn't really in today. It's kind of, we're living based on what did Jesus do, or what has Jesus done, and how does that impact my life today? Because today I have the Spirit of Christ in me, guiding and leading me. Some interesting thoughts there, but I think it's a great, great topic to discuss. But anyways, that's the end of the lesson today, Lesson 30, Baptists in the North, kind of what they were dealing with, even dealing with the social gospel. All right, good to be with you. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.